This is Ned Steinman, and today is November 7, 2000. I'm at the home of Alan Donald Abelson, 14 Homestead in Nepean, Ontario, and we're here to conduct an interview on behalf of the Ottawa Jewish Interview and History Project. And we'll begin with some initial questions. So just for the record, your full name?
Alan Donald Abelson.
And your date of birth?
August the 27th, 1928.
And your father's name?
Jess.
J-E-S-S,
Yeah.
Abelson. And your mother's name?
Molly, M-O-L-L-I-E.
And her maiden name?
Gray, G-R-A-Y.
And your wife's name?
Estelle, E-S-T-E-L-L-E.
And her maiden name?
Leviton.
And the names of your children?
Lynn.
Lynn?
Joan. Do you want the second names?
Sure.
Lynn Julia.
Right.
Joan, next is Joan Elizabeth.
Yes.
What's Karen's name? Karen? What's Karen's middle name?
That's okay.
Wait, Karen? Oh, she's got to have a middle name. Hold on one second. Just check out it's auto. Gail.
Karen Gale.
Yeah.
And
Donald Edward.
Donald Edward. Okay. And the date of your marriage?
You didn't want their married names, did you, at this stage?
No, maybe we'll go to that
back.
later, yeah.
Okay.
The date of your marriage?
October the 21st, 1950.
Yes, and happy 50th of wedding
Thanks very much.
anniversary.
Thanks very much.
And your place of birth?
Ottawa.
Okay. And we'll start off with some information just about you.
All
We'll
right.
talk about your early education. Where was that?
All right. Public school, or?
Start from the beginning, from public school.
Well, I went to Osgood Street Public School, York, for the first, I guess it was up to grade 6, and then grade 7 and 8 was intermediate, and that was at York Street Public School, and then to Lizard Collegiate.
For high school.
For high school, yes.
And where did you go to university?
I went to Carleton University in for 48, 49, and 50, and graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce degree in 1950.
Okay. And then you went to law school?
At Osgood Hall in Toronto. Well, before that, actually, I worked for a year in Montreal with a brokerage in Montreal.
Which brokerage?
It was the...
So that would be 1950?
In 1950.
Uh-huh.
And then I got married in October. I started work there, I guess, in August, and then we got married in October, and Estelle came to Montreal, and she was a legal secretary, and she had employment on Craig Street with a Jewish firm with, I think it was Lou Orenstein. I think he was an
Sure.
MLA, I think, in
Definitely,
Montreal.
yes.
Lou Orenstein
Yes.
was her boss,
Yes.
and a Mr. Diamond.
Yes.
And I worked for Pitfield Mackay and Company. They were investment dealers on
St. James
St. James Street.
Right.
Yeah. But I worked there for a year,
Yes.
and after about 10 months, it was rather funny. I decided to leave because I was just looking at the sons of the owners of the big investment dealer firm coming back from the Jamaica office with the tans, and I felt that there'd be a little nepotism required here before you moved up the ladder. So I ended up. It was the funniest thing. I worked for Estelle had a cousin that had a service station on Stanley Street near Sherbrooke.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to work. I made a little deal with him, and he was going to give me a salary and a commission. So I decided to work for him for a while. In any event, I lasted for about a month or two, and it was a funny. Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. What happened was there was an old fight promoter in Montreal. His name was Leighton, and he ran fights, I guess, on Friday nights in Montreal. Big guy, big tough Irishman. And he used to come up, when he came to the pumps to get gas, he started talking to me, and he says, found out that I had a college degree and that I had just recently been married. And he said, what the hell are you going to be doing here? He said, what good are you going to be for your wife, in a job like this type of thing. So what he used to do, every single rainy day, it was raining cats and dogs, he'd drive up to the pumps in the rain, and he'd say, hey, you, come over here. He says, clean off my window. He says, get that bird stuff off my window. I don't want any gas. And he would do that. And he eventually got under my skin.
Right.
And I remember applying for a few jobs out to carry for some office-type things because I had the BCom. And they weren't hiring in 1950. They were laying off. It was a bad year. So then I decided to apply to law school. And I guess it was probably because my wife had been a legal secretary for about 4 or 5 years, and that probably gave me the idea. And then I applied to law school, and I entered Osgoode Hall, in 1950.
And in those years, you received a degree from Osgoode Hall?
No, in those
Right.
days you didn't, because
Right.
Osgoode Hall was not a degree-granting institution.
Right.
They weren't a university. It was a seat of the Law Society in Ontario, and it was the only place that you could become a lawyer. And what happened is they had a law school for 2 years in the University of Toronto, and if students had gone to the university law school or took law there for 2 years, then they had to jump after the second year to Osgoode Hall and join us, and go through the whole Osgoode Hall business before they graduated. And at that time, it was the only law school in the province, and it's a little different than it is now, because we had about 225 in our class. And I'll go back a bit before I get to this. I think I'll just go back to the commerce one. I think because keep it in order. In our commerce class, our Bachelor of Commerce class at Carleton, there were 55 people that started out, because these were returning veterans at that time,
Right.
and they couldn't. It was hard for them to hack it, to go back to school. And we had 16 graduated in BCom 50. Can you imagine? Again, BCom 50, we had our 50th anniversary this past year for that as well. Anyway, back to the Osgoode Hall thing. Just wanted to mention the makeup of that class. But at Osgoode Hall, we had about 220. That shows you the difference from today. We had 225 in the class, and 220 were men, and 5 women.
Unbelievable.
That was the way it was
Very
at that time. Imagine that in 1951.
Yeah.
So we carried on there, graduated in 1955, and was a host of stories there. But I don't think you're really interested in.
Well, we certainly. I mean, we certainly can get to these things,
but basically, I don't. Anyhow, if you want to later, I can tell you some funny stories about that. But so we graduated in 55, and then after 55, what happened was that I graduated in May of 55. I opened up my office in June of that year with Ben Marcus. He's still a lawyer here in Ottawa. And it was Abelson and Marcus at that time, and we opened up an office. And the reason at that time that we got together, we both had asked around. I remember asking Teddy Metrick, who was a longtime lawyer in Ottawa, and I went to him, and he said, "Al, I'd love to have you," but he says, quite frankly, I never forget this. He says, "I'm just too jealous of my practice." He was afraid. He said things were tough for him when he started in the 30s, and he didn't want any hotshot coming along, to deprive him of any of his clients, this type of thing. And so he refused me, and Ben had articled with Beeman, Fife, and Alt at that time, and they refused him. So here are two fellas we were the
Ben Marcus is also Jewish?
Yeah, he's also Jewish. So we put our heads together, and we decided to open up an office at that time. We had 8, I think there were 18 in our class from Ottawa, and we were the only 2 that started out by ourselves. The rest went with other firms, but we were the only 2 Jewish fellows in the class.
Was it on purpose that 2 Jewish people would get together for the practice of law, or was there a reason behind that?
I don't think there was any particular reason. I guess maybe it was comfort. Maybe it was a comfort level, that the 2 of us were Jewish and we got together. Other than that, there was. I don't know if any of the other, everybody else in the class, I think, had been placed or had been taken up with existing firms, and so I think that we just, I guess, we're 2 Jewish boys, and just figured they'd be more comfortable, because most of the firms at that time they weren't looking for for Jewish lawyers.
Was this an issue of anti-Semitism, or was this more of an issue of a Jewish person being an outsider?
No, I think there's always has been a latent anti-Semitism. There's no question about it, and there were certain firms just simply were not interested in having Jewish lawyers. There's no question about it, and that's why. I mean, when Solowy and Mirsky got together, and they formed their firm, and Harry Sigler, he remained by himself. He was all his life. He just practiced by himself. Shared office with Ted Metrick for a while. But basically, I don't think there's any question about it. There was always a latent anti-Semitism. I'll get into this later when I get into my dad's and with the tennis court and so on. But you'll know more about that. But basically.
Yeah, just for now, we're just going over briefly a brief history, and then we'll hopefully get back to in detail of
But as I say, basically, there's no question about it. I mean, at that time, there weren't that many lawyers, in the city. There were established firms, and they didn't want to hire Jewish. There's no question about it.
Right.
They just did not want to hire Jewish, and as a result, I think that basically that's the reason that Ben and I were thrown together.
So this was sort of maybe a conscious or subconscious decision, but it was sort of like an understanding of that's how the situation was at the time.
That's right.
And was there some type of movement, or wouldn't even be considered to sort of breaking down fences, or that wouldn't have been?
No, not that time. No, not at that time.
Right.
Not at that time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would search out, like when I needed counsel, I would go to Ted Beeman or Morris Fife from the Beeman firm.
Yes.
Because actually our family grew up on Marlborough Avenue in Sandy Hill, and they were a block away. They were neighbors, sort of thing. But we were, I couldn't have had a nicer relationship with them. I used them as my counsel, and they couldn't have been nicer to me. But they weren't searching. It was nobody was looking to hire Jewish lawyers. Put it that way.
Right. Good. Okay. Then just continue on. Just briefly, what your professional life was over the years, and then we'll touch back onto the history of your family.
All right. Well, basically, I remained on with Ben Marcus, for 13 years, and then we broke up after the 13 years, and we had a student, George House, who wanted to come along with me when I was leaving. I had my fill at that particular time, and I decided to leave, and I really didn't want any more partners at that particular point in my life. But George sort of insisted, for whatever his needs were. He prevailed, and I continued on with him as Abelson House. And then we took Peter Weiss, who I think was the head of the police commissioner for a while, or is, I don't know.
Sure.
But we took Peter Weiss out of City Hall because he was a municipal law expert.
Right.
So then it was Abelson, House, and Weiss, and then people would be saying Abelson's House of Weiss, but it wasn't that. It was Abelson's House of Weiss. And then we added Billy Hunter and another chap by the name of Thatcher. So it was Abelson, House, Weiss, Hunter, and Thatcher, and we had 5 lawyers and 10 support staff. So we had a firm of 15, including the staff, and we had our own ball team in the lawyers' league. We had enough to staff our own ball team. But in any event, we continued on for a while. But the problem, what actually broke it up, was that, unknown to me, my partner, George House, was an alcoholic. And one day, as I best describe it, Ned, one day he didn't show up to work for 6 weeks. That's the best way I could describe it. And we didn't know what was happening. It was just unreal. There was no call from his wife, no call from him to his secretary, nothing. So I had to do my work at one end of the office, then I would go to his end of the office, do the work. And anyhow, he came back, and one day, 6 weeks later, he came back. But in the meantime, the other fellows had enough. They were just employees on a commission basis and employees, and they didn't like what was going on, so they picked up and left. And Weiss and Hunter formed their firm.
Yes.
Thatcher went to Burlington, and I was left by myself. And I brought in Barry Ages, who worked with me for a while. And then George came back, and we lasted together, as I say, for a total of 13 years as well. 13 seems to be my limit. And so I lasted 13 with Ben and 13 with George. And
so this brings us, if I'm doing my math right,
26.
1976.
Okay.
Okay.
And then after that, I remained just on my own for the next, what would that be? For the next 13, 14 years, I just practiced law by myself.
And you retired from the practice of law?
Yes.
What year?
I would say about 6 years ago. So what's that?
1994.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say about 1994 I retired.
Good. Okay, let's go back to what I want to go back to is let's have a bit of discussion about your family history.
Okay. Yes, son? No, I did everything.
Okay, we were going back and you were talking to me about the nature of your practice.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Okay, and from day one, we did everything.
Right.
Whoever happened to walk in the door in a small practice, this is what happens. Whoever walks in the door, you become an expert in that.
Exactly.
And but we did all our own court work. We did all our own. I did a lot of, a lot of motor vehicle and negligence work. I represented a number of insurance companies, and I did a lot of defense work, for insurance companies, and generally everything else that goes along with a practice, as you know, Ned.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I don't have to describe to you what goes on with the practice. So that's the way it carried on, and then I might as well get rid of it here. As far as the other things that I did, I was as far as the legal end of it was concerned, I was a past president of the County of Carleton Law Association.
And what year was that?
Good grief.
It's okay. You can give a rough idea. That's okay. The dates are not that specific.
I think I do have a date upstairs. I think there's a thing on the wall upstairs.
Were you one of the first Jewish people to hold that position?
I was. As a matter of fact, it's rather an interesting question. I think that Ted Metrick, I believe, was. Let's see how it went. Ted was, I think, 2 years before me, and I think Ted was the first. This is rather interesting. I think he was the first Jewish president of the County of Carleton Law Association. So there was Ted Metrick was 2 years before me, and then Dan Chilcott was a Supreme Court judge. Yes. He was the year before me, and then I was next, and David Scott was the year after me. So he was my vice president, David Scott.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And at those time was there ever an issue holding these leadership positions? And just briefly, I'll say the County of Carleton Law Association is an association of all the lawyers in the city of Ottawa, with a long-standing history, and it does a lot of work to organize events for lawyers, as well as a lot of continuing legal education, as well as being the one that runs the library, just for the sake of placing the institution. Was there a significant involvement of Jewish lawyers, one? And secondly, how did Jewish lawyers fall within the framework of the legal community? Were they part of it? Were they separate? Was there some type of integration?
No, I think there was. I think that from the way I gathered, there was nothing there. I think the Jewish lawyers integrated very well at this time. You know, I don't think there was anything. I don't think there was any fingers pointed at any particular one. I don't think there was any. I couldn't. There's no. I really couldn't find, any real, say, this, just an overall feeling that you might have with, some of the, Rockcliffe type lawyers, this type of thing. But basically, I think the relations were very, very good because, John Mirsky was very well accepted. I mean, he was a wonderful counsel, could speak beautifully, and he did an awful lot of criminal work. And he was very well accepted. Hy Soloway was always, very, very prominent in the community, and I articled with them, as a matter of fact, that firm before I graduated. And no, I can't. I don't think there's. I don't think things moved, along fairly smoothly. There was one item that I wanted to mention about that. Just something like that. Maybe it'll come back to me. Just slipped my mind for a moment.
Okay.
There was something that I wanted to mention, some incident. But basically, I never had any difficulty at all.
And I say this only in terms of my experience being someone from Montreal, where the Jewish lawyers felt the need to have a strong community organization as Jewish lawyers.
Yeah, right.
Because not only were they a minority from a religious point of view, but their language was put them in a minority. I have found from my experience as a Jewish lawyer in Ottawa that there has not been the necessity for camaraderie as Jewish lawyers.
Right.
So I was wondering if that was something that existed.
No, I don't. I would say no. I would say no. Not in my time. I would say it was a little difficult to find employment.
Yes.
But once you were set up and you carried on your practice and your different interchange with lawyers in the city, I never had any difficulty at all.
Interesting.
No, not at all.
Okay, let's go back to because we'll come back to these areas, but let's go back to the initial. Let's go back to trace your family's history in Ottawa. And who was the first person in your family to live in Ottawa? Okay,
I'm going to just give you a capsule comment.
Sure.
The Abelsons came from the village of Neinstadt, Neinstadt, in Kovna-Guberny. So it would be the province of Kovna in Lithuania. Guberny.
Yes.
And I have to tell you something funny. This is funny, and I'll get to this whole thing. Every Friday night for Friday night supper, we'd always have my cousin Abe Ash, who came from the same village that my grandfather came from, and everyone, 5 kids around the table, and he'd always talk about, your grandfather type thing. Your great-grandfather was nothing but a chicken killer. Well, we know that they had to be educated to be showcats then, but it's nothing but a chicken killer, you know, in Neinstadt. But as kids, when we heard Neinstadt and Kovna-Guberny, we didn't know what the hell it was. And this is the funniest part about it. About 5 years ago, I realized that Guberny was province, Kovna was Kovna, you know, in Lithuania, one of the major cities. And Neinstadt, believe it or not, I was attending an affair in Toronto, some wedding in Toronto, and there was a display, a huge display of the shuls in the village of Neinstadt in Lithuania.
Unbelievable.
I never knew it even existed. Now I want to go see it. Isn't that funny, Ned? I never realized it existed and I see what I'd heard about from the time that I was a child, you know, Neinstadt and Kovna-Guberny. In any event, I don't waste too much time.
No, it's very important to trace where the history of the people from moving to Ottawa originally and their history, where they came from, the origins of the communities.
Now the Freiman, A.J. Freiman,
yes.
The Bilskys and the Freemans and the other, there's a Kramer family that's related to Morton Baslaw, and they were the ones that were responsible, you know, for bringing the Abelson family to Ottawa. But initially, what happened? They came over from Lithuania.
I'm just going to stop you. Who came first?
Okay. My grandfather, Wolf.
Your father's father?
My father's father.
Yes.
My grandfather, Wolf, he and his 3 brothers and a sister. There were 4 Abelsons, boys, and 1 Abelson girl. So 5 of them.
So 5 children.
5 children came over in 1888.
Now, 1888 was very early for immigration into Canada.
Yeah, well, they immigrated into New York.
Into New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
The girl went to Chicago, and allegedly she married a Bernstein. I don't know what her name was. The Abelson brothers, there was Meyer, these are my uncles, my father's uncles. That'd be the 4 that came over. Would be Meyer, and there was Joe, and there was Simon, and my grandfather Wolf. They were the 4 boys. They all settled in New York State. Now, my grandfather is about 1888. Now, my grandfather became a peddler. Like, that's what they did in those days. He was a peddler, and he ended up somehow or other. It's rather interesting. My grandmother Julia was born in Toronto. She was Julia Rosenblum. Can you believe this? My grandmother. Can you imagine when she settled in Toronto? She was born in Toronto and graduated from high school and everything else in Toronto.
So you can trace 3 generations to your age.
That's right.
Very rare.
Isn't that something?
It's very
So
rare.
Julia Rosenblum was my grandma, my smiling face grandma. She was wonderful. And so how Wolf found her, I'll never know. But anyway, he met Julia in Toronto and married her. And then they moved to Cleveland.
Which was a major Jewish center.
Was it in Cleveland, eh?
Yeah.
Okay. They moved to Cleveland. And so they married in around 1890. They married, and their first child was they had 7 children. They had 4 girls, and Bertie was number 1. Bertie, Sarah, Helen, and Ada, and 3 boys: Jess, Sydney, S-I-D-N-E-Y, and Nate. Okay, so they all lived in Ottawa. So they moved. Now they were in Cleveland. The family moved to Ottawa in 1900.
So all these people moved to Ottawa.
Yeah, the whole family.
There were 7 children.
7 children, and 7 children, and no, they wouldn't be 7. Some would be born in Ottawa because. I don't know exactly which ones, but Sid was born here. The youngest, Sally and Sid, would have been born here. But they were the 2 youngest, Sally and Sid. The rest of them would have been born in the States because my dad moved here in 1900 when he was 8 years old, because he was born April 14th, 1892. My dad, Jess, April 14th, 1892. So he came here at 8 years of age. And in 1900, the family moved in, and they were brought here by the Bilskys.
Now, how would the Bilskys find them in Cleveland, and how was that connection?
Because they all came from the same hometown in Neinstadt.
I see. Okay. And so the Bilskys were somehow was there this Landsmannschaft groups? Is that what it was?
Probably.
Okay.
Because they grew up with them. There was, as I say, there was Lillian Freiman, A.J. Freiman's wife, Lillian,
Who was a Bilsky.
was a Bilsky.
Right.
And my dad, there was some relationship. I don't know exactly what it was, but there was some relationship between the Freemans and the Abelsons from the way back, some relationship back there.
Right.
Because my dad, all he ever did, he used to drive. She was quite a famous lady,
Yes.
Mrs.
Yes.
Freiman. And my dad he was just at her beck and call. He would take her and he'd always take her to collect money, and he was her chauffeur. He would just take her whenever she needed. He just loved her, and he took her everywhere.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So they somehow made this connection, and they decided to move to Ottawa.
Yes.
Was there some type of job promise to your grand?
Nothing.
Neither.
They came cold.
Okay.
They came cold in 1900. Just settled here cold. And what happened? My dad actually at that point he was the second oldest. He was the oldest boy, and he was quite a go-getter. He finished school. He left. He went to Waller Street Public School, and then he left Waller Street Public School and just in grade 6 or 7 or something. When he was about 12 years old, he took off, and from 12 years of age, he worked, and he was a super salesman and a wonderful athlete.
Let's go back a second.
Yeah.
In terms of, did your father ever discuss with you his first memories of Ottawa?
No, what he did at first, when he arrived here, 10 years, he was 8. At 10 years of age, he joined the Ottawa YMCA. At 10 years of age.
For sports?
For sports. At 10 years of age, and he just grew up. He was a lifelong member for 60 years at the Y. There's a plaque on the wall out there in the garage.
Yeah.
He was going to cool a plaque after he was there for 60 years of membership. Him and Arthur Crawley, who was leading accountant in town. The two of them were given plaques. But as far as this is my dad here. I don't know if you're aware of this. This was, if you read that, you get a good insight into him.
So I'm looking at the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin dated December 12, 1986, specifically page 30, which talks about Sports Hall of Fame honors Jess Abelson, and the byline says, considered the founding father of Jewish sport in Ottawa. And this bulletin would also be in the archives as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so it'll all be there. It'll be there. But anyhow, he as I say, I had some. That's why I wanted you to come here, Jeff. I at least. Ned. I'm sorry, Ned. I was just the reason I wanted you here because I have some. I just want to show you some wonderful photos of his team photos. I'll show you them after. But anyway, he was an outstanding athlete. He went on Rough Rider championship teams, paddling champ of Canada.
Wow.
And basketball champ. There's that picture. He was a starting guard in the Canadian basketball champions in 1913. Canada. He was a starting guard in the Canadian champions.
It was unbelievable for a Jewish boy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well.
What he did, he just completely broke down the barrier. He was responsible for breaking down the barrier. He was the number one and the most outstanding Jewish athlete and Jewish personality in the city. He had a store on Spark Street, a men's clothing store on Spark Street, and his competitors in those days were Fishers across the street.
Really?
Fishers,
Yes.
Fishers menswear.
Sure.
But and anyway, he supported sport like you wouldn't believe, and he also, that's in here, he started up the first Jewish Boy Scout troop, the 39th Jewish.
He was the founder.
He was the founder and the first Scoutmaster.
Very
And they
good.
present him with a loving cup. It's another. You have all the material on that story was the archives have it. Red Schaefer, Milt Schaefer, did the whole background of the Ottawa 39th troop.
But let's
So
give
that's
it from
all
your from the perspective that you know, from the history that you know of it.
Okay. Well, as I say, from all I know is it's a bad history because he had when we grew up on Marlborough Avenue and we had a 13-room house on Marlborough just near Strathcona Park. There's Range Road and then the river.
Yes.
Well, he just rented the house. He never he was able to support the big family, but that was about as far as he could go.
Right.
But our basement, and it's a shame. It's just a tragedy, really, because we had a 13-room house. There must have been 8 rooms in the basement, and all over the basement we had pictures and all his team pictures, but we had all these trophies that he had won. And we used to use them as goalposts, when we were playing soccer down in the basement, and we kicked them and we dented them and we lost them, and he didn't seem to care. Nobody offered any concern. And among the trophies, I remember clearly, was that loving cup that was presented to him as the first Scoutmaster of the 39th Troop.
Interesting.
And I don't know where that went. But then he also started up, he had the Strathcona softball team, which were the best. It's described here, or it's described something else I can give you. Described on this sheet here, too. There's some more material for you. That what we're attempting to do right now, this is a little background of his sporting activities as well. Because what we're trying to do is get him into the Ottawa Sports Hall of Fame. He'd be the first Jewish member of the Ottawa Sports Hall of Fame. And we're working on that, and that was submitted by my brother as an opening.
So I'll just read some of these things which are interesting.
Yeah.
It says that Jess was born April 14, 1892 in Cleveland, and the family settled in Ottawa in 1900 as one of the first 35 Jewish families. And his athletic career began at the YMCA at age 12. And he played for the Ottawa Rough Riders.
Actually, it's age 10. He's got that wrong.
Oh, here it's okay. The Ottawa Rough Riders of the Big Four beginning in 1913. Do you know what position he played?
Yeah, flying wing.
Flying wing.
Flying wing was the fifth man in the backfield.
Unbelievable.
Best tackler. Honest to God, that's all. Talking about that, honestly, Ned, that's used to hear all my life. You know, everybody in the city knew him. The man, they knew him like Kleenex, just like you knew Kleenex. Everybody knew him.
So he was well known in the general community as well.
Oh, everybody in the city knew him in those days, throughout the 30s and 40s. Jess Abelson, everybody knew him. You know, I mean, when my brother was killed, my brother Duke was killed flying overseas, and you know, his picture was on the front page of the Ottawa Journal. You know, because I mean, everybody knew it. And Jess, you know, my father was just so dominant in this community.
So what?
He never had any money, but he was a most beloved individual. You know, generally in the city. I'm telling you, everybody loved him.
Did he bring other Jewish kids outside of the Scouts? Did he bring other Jewish kids into the YMCA, into other sports?
I don't know who he brought into the Y, but I know he taught lots of them how to swim, because he was always out of Britannia. That's where they ran their war canoe out of Britannia. So that's where everybody grew up in this town. That was the fun place for the summer, out in Britannia.
And how was it to be the son of someone so well known?
Well, put it this way: in our household, there was only one voice. It was my father's voice. Okay.
I see.
It was one of those households. My father was very dominant, very aggressive and very dominant, and there was one voice in our household. And but no matter where you went, you couldn't go anywhere. We used to go up and down. We used to have individual local merchants up and down Sparks and Spark Street and Rio Street. It was beautiful in those days. Streetcars would go up and back, and you had all the local merchants, and we used to go from store to store, you know, in kibbutz, and but anywhere you walked in the street, hi Jess, hi Jess, hi Jess, hi Jess, hi Jess. That's what happened anytime you went downtown. Everybody knew him, and I in a sense, I always felt that you were sort of submerged, and his personality was so dominant.
I can see that. Yeah. I can see that was happening.
Yeah.
Tell me about your siblings. How many siblings did you have?
Well, let's see now. There were five in our family. We had my sister Sylvia is the oldest, and then my brother Duke. Listen to what his real name is. It was Lawrence Balfour Abelson.
Right.
He was named after the Balfour Declaration. Right. You know, can you imagine, eh? And my dad was he was an ardent Zionist. He loved any Jewish causes, and I have a picture in that what's that Jewish paper, Jewish magazine, comes out of Montreal periodically.
Canadian Jewish News?
Yeah, his picture was in there one day. Not that paper, there's a magazine. It's a magazine format.
I don't know.
I'll show it. I have some over here. But it showed him with A.J. Freiman. They were delegates to a Zionist convention in Toronto one year with the top hats and the long coats.
Oh, yes.
Really interesting. But he named my eldest brother, Duke. Duke was the one that was killed overseas. He was a flyer.
In World War II.
In World War II,
right.
Yeah. He flew in mosquitoes, the de Havilland mosquito aircraft.
And he flew for the
Royal
Canadian Air Force.
Yes.
And do you know when, was he the only one who served in the Army from your family?
Yeah, he was the only one of age. He was the only one of the
Was he drafted, or he...
No, he joined up on his 18th birthday.
Joined up himself.
With Arnie Greenberg in town, from Arnie Greenberg and Matula, and they walked in. They had a little government job, because they dropped out of school, I think, after grade 12, and they both had a little government job, and he, on his 18th birthday, he just walked into the recruiting office and signed up for the Air Force.
Did your parents know?
Well, they knew fairly soon thereafter, but that's what happened. Anyhow, so Duke was quite a guy. He initially signed up as a pilot, and he was washed out as a pilot in St. Catharines for whatever reason. I don't know the real reason. And then he switched over to navigator school. They were called them observers in those days, navigators. And he ended up graduating in Rivers, Manitoba, and he ended up tops in his class and won the gold medal for his class. Then they kept him on as an instructor, as they used to do for the top students. They kept him on as an instructor for about a year, and then he went overseas, and he couldn't believe it, his fortune, when he met a chap from Lisgar,
Really?
Alan Haig was the pilot, and there were two in they sit side by side in Mosquito. And Alan Haig was the pilot, and he was teamed up with his old pal from Lisgar. He couldn't believe it, and he was a great track and field man, Alan Haig. Anyway, the two of them they were in OTU, and then they had 3 or 4 trips over France and Germany, shooting up air. Their job was to shoot up trains, anything that moved, they would shoot up. And then they came back, and after I think it was the 4th trip, one night Alan had to fly a mechanic over to pick up a part at another aerodrome, and he crashed into a hangar, taking off, and was killed. Duke wasn't with him. They put Duke on compassionate leave for a month, and then they teamed him up with another chap by the name of Al Horn, who had 2,000 hours on Spitfires in North Africa, and they put them together in OTU operations training unit, and they crashed out on a training flight. And he's buried in Chester.
What year was that?
In November 15th, 1943.
So, and do you recall the time when you got the news?
I guess it'll be November 16th, 1943.
Do you remember it?
Oh yeah, do I ever? My uncle Sid was over there at the time. He was in supply in headquarters in London. And oh yeah, we got everything. We got, I've got all kinds of stuff that was sent from the government. They sent medal and all this sort of stuff. When they were killed, they'd give you one of those, like a Purple Heart sort of thing. There was a purple type thing that they'd send up medals, and letters from the powers that be, and so on, and letters. We have all that stuff. I have tucked away, all kinds of stuff. But letters from his commanding officer to my parents, and then we sat Shiva up in our house on Marlborough Avenue, and that was it. We elected to leave Duke there and not to return him to Ottawa,
right?
Because we felt that's where he should be.
Have you ever visited his grave?
A half dozen times. I was there last year.
Nice.
I go every time I go to Israel. I make a point of stopping in England and visiting Duke's grave.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sylvia.
Oh yeah, Sylvia, and then Duke was
Sylvia, and what's her married name?
Gellman, Gellman.
And she live in Ottawa?
Yeah, she's a widow.
Okay.
Widow. She lives in Ottawa, and then Duke was, as I say, Lawrence Balfour, and then Stanley Jerome, or just Stan. It's good enough, Stan, and he's in Israel. He's up in Beitar, and he's got places in Jerusalem and in Beitar. He's turned himself into a farmer. Stan was a psychiatrist here in town, practiced for many years, and then he picked up and left in 1973. Picked up and left.
A long time, right?
Yeah, and he's been living in Israel since.
And I'm sure he has family there as well.
No, he never had children.
Never.
He has children from his first wife here.
Uh-huh.
He had 2 children from his first wife here, and his former wife Judy lives in Toronto. He's got a son and a daughter. And then Bobby is then I come next. We're all 3 years apart. I'm next, and Bob is my younger brother. So there were 4 boys and a girl in our family.
And Bob lives in?
He's in insurance here
in Ottawa.
In Ottawa.
Okay. Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
Let's talk about the war years in Ottawa. What you can recall.
Can I tell you the war years? First of all, I'll bring this in here during the war years. My dad started the Tel Aviv Tennis Club in the mid-30s, and the reason that the Tel Aviv Tennis Club was formed, he arranged. He went around to businessmen. He took money from local businessmen, kept it away from the VOD because he wanted to run things and keep it open on Saturday because kids only had 2 days to play tennis, so he couldn't get involved with the VOD. But anyway, they purchased the Riverside Tennis Club in the mid-30s, and my dad was the first president. And what he was, this was active from mid-30s right through till about 1950 when it went out of business. Tennis just died by that time, and people were switching to golf, and tennis just died. But anyway, the reason that he did it was that there were 4 existing tennis clubs in Ottawa, and Jews were not welcome. They would not allow a Jew in to play tennis in Ottawa. So my dad had enough of that, and he went out and bought his own tennis club.
Fair.
And that's where I was. At 8 clay courts, and the beautiful part about this whole thing, Ed, it's unreal. As I was going through university, I would be the groundsman. My brother Stan was the groundsman, and we were with a big roller full of water, and it's quite a deal there, to look after clay courts, because they break up. You got to mend them, and then nets down in the morning. You start at 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock every day. They have to be done all over every day, and watered and rolled and matted and everything, and the lines put on and everything else, and the whole thing. Anyway, we ended up having beautiful clay courts, and the Rideau tennis, we were right next to the Rideau. You know where the Rideau Tennis Club is? Right next to the Rideau. And the climax was that my proudest moment, here I was looking after the courts, my proudest moment was when they had the Canadian Junior Tennis Championships here in Ottawa. They were held at the Rideau, and they didn't have enough courts in the Rideau. They wouldn't let us join the years before, and they asked my dad if it would be possible if they could use some of our courts at the Tel Aviv. And they came over, and they were the leading tennis players for years and years and years, best tennis players in Canada. Anyhow, they came over, and the report was they liked our courts better than the Rideau. They had too much sand on the Rideau to stop them from making holes, but I had less sand, but it would break up more, but I had to repair more, but yet it was better. So it was nothing but plaudits. So what happened during the war years, the Tel Aviv Tennis Club was the Jewish community center. It turned out to be the Jewish community center in Ottawa. And not enough, this is my real quarrel, this is really the real reason that I wanted to make sure that the story is told. The tennis club has not been given its due anywhere, but it was our community center, and my dad was always so proud of one reason, for one thing, that at least 200 Jewish marriages resulted.
Really?
At least 200 Jewish marriages resulted from having that Jewish tennis club. Imagine, including my own.
Really?
Estelle, my wife, drove up with Lena Betcherman on their bikes from Creighton Street in New Edinburgh. And I was, and I met her on the door and on the steps, and I welcomed her in, and then taught her how to play tennis, and then we went on from there. Can you imagine? And then, but it just goes on and on. Firestone, Otto Firestone, the Firestone, his son that owned Terrace Investments and so on. Otto, his father, met Isabel Toronto there, and it goes on and on and on. There's at least that's what my dad was most proud of.
That was of all his accomplishments, that was what he was most proud of.
But this place, we used to have Sunday night dances.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd run the canteen with Estelle. I did the courts during the day, and we ran the canteen after the courts were finished to get money for university. And then every Sunday night, they had an outside porch. I have pictures. I've got a lot of different pictures that I can show you here. But it's the funniest thing. So far, nothing has ever been done on a community level. My father was never honored. You know why he was never honored? He never had any money. He had the Betchermans and the Zagermans and all
the ones with the money,
and the Freemans and all this crap. But the guy that was most beloved in the city of Ottawa was the old man. Look here now. This is the type of thing. Look where this is. 19.
So we're looking at the Ottawa Citizen from 1949, right?
Yep.
And it says Tel Aviv tennis team takes Section C championships.
That's me, and there's Estelle, Maury Kranzberg, Jack Lazarus, Sammy Hanser. That was Elsa Schaefer, Estelle, and Molly Friedman, and this is Dina
Edelson.
Dina Edelson. Yeah.
Very nice.
Isn't that neat? But I even got the locker books of all the members that were there at the final end. Can you imagine?
So this was before there was the JCC on Chapel Street.
Exactly.
Of course.
This was it. But nobody. I'm saying during this period from 35 through to the end of this is I guess it was Riverdale first. I got deeds from the registry office once. Then they took over Riverdale Tennis, and they took over Riverdale Tennis. This was the thing. That was the Scouts thing I told you that
yes.
they had.
talking about. Yeah, let's go back. The tennis club is very interesting.
Oh, I think this is here at Tel Aviv Tennis Club Federal. They were sold to the FTC. They took it over on the 18th of January, 1954. That was the end of it.
Do you remember why it was the end of it?
Yeah, there were no members. The membership just dropped down to 5, 6, 7. It was an amazing thing. It just dropped.
And at that time, also the JCC had started.
I think so. I must have, because it must have started at that time. But
did he get any support from the established Jewish community?
No, all he did, he had to do it all by himself. He would go to his merchants around town, up and down Spark Street and Rideau Street.
Jewish merchants.
Jewish merchants, strictly yes. Jewish merchants, that's all. And he would get handouts from the Jewish merchants. He worked very closely with Sam Leposki, who was the lawyer at the time.
Uh-huh.
And Sam was a good friend of his. And but my dad he just ran it all these years. He just ran it. He kept it on a dignified basis. It was only whites only. If a girl came with some sort of some small top on, he'd make sure that she was covered up and all this. He just ran everything. But these were.
So we're looking at pictures, black and white pictures from the Tel Aviv. Just to go on, that we're looking at pictures from the Tel Aviv Tennis Club.
And now look at these. It was just the most fabulous place, and I regret it for so many years. When I had children, I grew up and I had kids. We had one meeting with a few of the Jewish establishment figures, Zev Vered and Normie Zagerman and Freiman and so on, to see if we could revive these days. And nothing. Then the next thing you knew, Shavinsky opened up the Ottawa Athletic Club and monopolized all the tennis in the area, and that was the end of that. And that thought was over. But here, what this was, these pictures reflected. There was a Jewish tennis club in Montreal. You may know the name of it. You may know, I'm not sure. And there was a Toronto Hudson Club, which was a Jewish club in Toronto. And we would play for the Lillian Freiman Trophy.
Oh, wow.
And that's what that was, the Lillian Freiman Trophy. You don't remember the name, Ned, of the Jewish club?
Remember.
Okay, they had one, but they had, so the Montrealers, Toronto, and us, and we have tournaments down here, and look at this particular year we won it. And this picture is unreal. This is what is his name? He was in the army. He was such a dapper guy. I know his name anyway. And that's Ritzy Gould and her sister. What the hell is that? I reckon Sid Pollock. And Cy Kornblatt was a wing an air marshal, wing commander, air marshal in the Air Force, one of the highest officers in the Air Force, Second War. Cy Kornblatt. Harry Kaufman is still painting pictures to this day. And this is Vera Brody. And Buck Basinski was the best player in the club. He had a powerful serve. Harold Pearl, Herbie Pearl is a lawyer.
Yes.
That's his father, Harold. And Harold was the president in those days.
You can see there's that one.
Yeah, Harold was the president in those days. It's about 1939. Joe Kaufman, Flash Kaufman, and Isabel Toronto, who married Otto Firestone. This was a relative of mine, Frances Ash. She married Schachter. Remember Schachter's Dry Goods in Montreal?
Sure.
Aaron Schachter?
Sure.
Well, she married Aaron Schachter. And Joel Schachter is her son, and my brother Duke. And this is one of the years that we won. We played off, and this is the team that played off, and we won the championship again. Won the trophy another year. There's my dad. And
around what year would this be? This is you?
Would be, yeah. That's me. That would be, I guess, it would have to be about probably around 1947, I think, 46, 47, something like that. But what I'm saying, this whole era, you talk about, the historical society. This is one of the major times. To me, it was one of the most interesting and the most beloved periods, of the whole community and this Tel Aviv Tennis Club.
So people would go, and it's such an identifiable Jewish name as well.
Why? You know why? Because my old man insisted.
Excellent.
And this is very interesting because the rest of the board, they wanted to hide under the Toronto Hudson type name or the Montreal Elmwood or something like this. The old man said, screw it. And he insisted. He says, it's the Tel Aviv Tennis Club. The bastards wouldn't let Jews join, and they couldn't. A Jew couldn't join at Rideau, New Edinburgh, Rockcliffe, any of the clubs. And the Ottawa Club, none of them. And so the purpose was Ottawa was a Jewish club. And they didn't want nobody was other than Jews were allowed. It was just strictly Jews. And that was it. And it was but that's why he over in the executive, he told me himself that during an executive meeting when the name came up, most of them wanted to pick some other name, a little shy about in my mid-30s about calling it
Very much so,
Tennis Club,
right.
not the old man. He was a tough egg, and so he just insisted that that's what was going to be the name. And
So it would be tennis, and what else? What else?
that's all they had. It was just a tennis club
And social
and a
events.
social club, because as I say, they had all the every Sunday night was a dance, and that's where the whole community would come. Everybody came. You didn't have to be a member. All the Jewish young couples came every Sunday night to the Tel Aviv Tennis Club. Every summer night.
And what would be there? Music.
You had music. We had records. So it was record music,
Right.
dancing, and I was running the canteen, and Stella was running the canteen. So lots of drinks. It was a great night for us, and but it was just great. Really, it was just a super place. Just to relax. They had it was a small shack. They had a men's dressing room, women's dressing room, and in the back they had ping pong tables, and a canteen. And Doc Steinberg would have musicals and play classical music one night. People would sit around and listen to his classical music, and they'd card games and stuff other nights and so on. But it was just a wonderful period. But the key to the whole thing, Ned, and this is people, it's funny, times don't change, but people miss the boat. My old man didn't miss the boat, because to meet, if the boy meet girl thing, and not in a stressful situation, you can't have anything less stressful than just meeting, in a sort of a sports milieu.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right.
If you don't want to play a game, you don't play a game. But if you like somebody, you'll play again. You know what I mean? And this type of thing. And there's no stress, in young couples. I mean, if you like, then you continue and you take somebody out or something. You have a date, but there was no stress, just to go down and enjoy yourself and play tennis.
So these were fond memories, not for your whole family, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
wonderful.
Oh no, it was a great time.
And it was just in the summertime.
Just in summer. They'd probably open up in mid-May, and you'd go till October the 1st, that type of thing.
And how was it run? Was there a board of directors?
Yeah, there was a. It's too bad I don't know where all the minutes say it was run. They had a president and a regular board of directors.
And people would pay membership too.
Yeah, and the membership was unreal. It cost in those days would be about $12. $13 for a male membership, $12 for a female for the whole year. And my dad would always provide free tennis rackets for kids that came in. Like, my Stella had no, and they were poor people. My wife's people were very, very poor. Her father had a little grocery store on Creighton Street, and she couldn't. Folks couldn't pay up any money, for rackets or anything. But the old man arranged. He had free rackets for everybody and balls and stuff, for kids that couldn't afford it.
Very fascinating.
But it was just. But what is sad, I know. See, it's in part it's my own fault in part, because Lawrence Friedman's wanted me to prepare some sort of a lecture and talk about it and so on. But at least it'll get recorded this way.
Well, it's good. Do you have any more stories you can tell about it?
Well, what else? What other stories? The thing is, when we got into there were no A players, or maybe one A player in Ottawa, Don McDermott, who was a Canadian champion at that time, and B players. We entered a B group and a C group, but we only had legitimately, I would think, maybe half a dozen B players, and that was it.
Right.
And then the C, as I said, we won the championship one year, and that was great.
Right.
That was they couldn't believe it. And they just couldn't believe it. I think the team we finally beat in the championship was the Ottawa team, and they couldn't believe it.
A bunch of Jews beating them, right?
Exactly. They couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. But what I'm saying is, it was just. It was just a place for people to meet, enjoy themselves, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful spot. And 8 clay courts, it was just perfect. Just a short distance from Reno, about 100 yards from Reno.
Very nice, very nice. So, and this just came as your father's idea? As an idea that he just decided to go with?
That's right.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Sounds like a wonderful time.
Yeah, it really was.
No, that is something that the archive should have more information.
Yeah,
so now that we're doing this, is there?
You can make a note as well that I've got a ton of photographs. So I have a lot of, actual photographs of people playing and with rackets and all this, and plus these other. I have a lot of photographs. If I go through my albums, of those days if they ever want a display or any type of thing, of the Tel Aviv Tennis Club days.
Well, you may want to be interested in depositing those things with the archive.
Yeah, I have a lot of them here that I will probably have to. I'll do that. I think I'll get around to doing that.
It would be very interesting. Certainly, it's it talks about a certain time very well.
But it covers that period from, as I say, from about 1930, 34, 35, right up through to 1950. So it's a 15-year period, and that was the place to go for young people in the city, and not just young. Everybody went.
Would you say that the JCC replaced it afterwards as the place to go?
You know what? It replaced it, but as good as it could. As I mentioned to you, after the war, the golf club started.
Right.
And a lot of people, just left the tennis, for the golf at that point, and because it was a first Jewish golf club, and it was the same thing with golf. Jews couldn't join Gentile golf clubs,
right?
So then they switched to golf and developed that Read Over Your Golf Club, and then I'm saying at the time, at the end, there were maybe half a dozen members that just died off. Tennis just died off, and that was it. But anyhow. So that was the story there. What else
we were talking about? We were talking about the war years. Your memories of the war years.
Well, the war years. They had the medical corps was stationed at Lansdowne Park, and it was a lot. And you also had headquarters, Army headquarters, and all the services. The headquarters were here in Ottawa. So it was quite it was a very, very busy time, and along with everything else, with the ration books and rationing gasoline and rationing sugar and rationing this and rationing that, saving certificates that you used to have. Every kid would have little books where you put 25-cent saving certificates when you had a quarter, and when you filled up the book, you had $5, and then you got a little savings bond for $5 savings bond, this type of thing. Everybody was saving for the war effort, and. It's I don't know how
what do you recall of the Jewish community having any the organizations of the Jewish community at that time? How it organized itself, and what was it like to be a member of the Jewish community at that time?
Well, I sort of all I sort of remember. I remember the Talmud Torah days on going on George Street. The Talmud Torah was on George Street. I remember going for pre-bar mitzvah lessons, and then I remember then they had AZA clubs, the AZA and BBYO, those organizations, and so I was a member of these things, but I don't remember too much more. I started out like my own man when I was about 10. I joined the Y, and then I was playing basketball all the time and so on, and I'll show you something here. We turn that thing off for a second.
Okay. We're continuing. Anything specific about the warriors? So, you mentioned about were you involved in any of these Jewish youth groups?
Yeah, yes. As a matter of fact, the only thing at that time when the war broke out, I was a scout. I was with there was Abe Hochberg and Arnie Bortz and myself and Jack Barrett. We were in the 39th Troop, and we used to have, as kids, have to get war service points. And we'd drive around on our bicycles and stuff, and blackouts, test blackouts, and things of that nature, And yeah, really, it's a.
I would imagine that your father encouraged you to do these things.
Oh sure,
yeah.
Oh sure.
And but I would imagine that the thing that most affected you from the war was the death of your brother.
No question.
Right.
No question. The war was over in May in '45, and I'm just finishing up at Lisgar at that time. Or not finished. I guess I don't know what year I was, grade 11 or whatever, and that was not a happy moment. Everybody was, obviously everybody was celebrating. The war in Europe was over, but we weren't celebrating.
What year did your brother die?
43.
In 43.
Yeah. And that's it. And it just wrecked my mother. She just never got out of bed. And after that, it just wrecked her, because Duke was quite a guy. He was. A great sense of humor. He was just a very, fine-looking fella. Mm-hmm. Great athlete. He's a wonderful tennis player.
Right.
And basketball player.
And you were just showing me that your father had made an award Explain to me what you were just showing
Yeah,
me.
he presented an award to the senior basketball league for the high schools in the city of Ottawa. It was called the Flying Officer Duke Ableson Memorial Trophy. It was up for annual competition to the individual best combining sportsmanship with ability in the senior basketball league in the city of Ottawa. It involved all of the high schools in the city of Ottawa, and he presented that in honor of my brother.
And 1 year you won it.
Yeah, I think the third year. Yeah, yeah, the third year that it was in competition, I won it.
Is that something that stayed around for a number of years?
That's still outstanding after all these years.
Really?
As a matter of fact,
same name?
Oh yeah, it's the same trophy, and I was just thinking what I have to do, and I haven't got time this year. I have to go and locate it and find it. I want to leave it at Lisgar, and then I'll present another one. I'll get another one like it, because I don't think there's any more space for the plaques to go on it. So I have to get another replacement. I was thinking of that.
Wonderful legacy.
Get around it. You know?
Wonderful legacy. Very nice. Okay, let me just go on.
Yes.
Let's talk about the 1950s then in Ottawa, which was post-boom. Some type of boom was happening in Ottawa because of the post-war years, and there was a lot of construction that happened and a lot of business that was coming forth. And how was it as a lawyer in those years?
See, I graduated in 1955.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out in 1955 with Ben Marcus. That's right, because we graduated in May. That's right. And I opened up my office, and we opened the office in June of '55. And at that time, I must say that it was a delight. You know, there was still professionals still at that time received great recognition. It was still an honor a real honor to become a lawyer in those days. It really was.
Were you the first person of your family to graduate with a professional degree?
Yes. Yes. My brother Stan Stan had graduated in 1950. No, wait, hold on now. I think Stan graduated in 1950, and he was my brother, my next up, the one that's living in Israel now. Stan was actually the first graduate of Ottawa University's medical school. The first. Because he was in the first class, and they graduated them alphabetically.
And he was the first.
He was the first graduate.
Abelson.
Yeah, the first graduate of Ottawa University Medical School, and because he won the prize in psychiatry, it sent him off in that direction, and then he went on to Topeka, Kansas, to the Carl and Will Menninger School of Psychiatry down in Topeka, Kansas for 3 years. Graduated as a psychiatrist and came back, went through the Brockville Institution for a while, and then opened up his own practice here for a number of years.
So those must have been proud moments for your parents.
Oh, and how?
To have
a
lawyer and a doctor.
That's right.
But I'm sure the lawyer came second, right?
I think so.
I'm sure my son, the doctor, came first.
I'm sure. And so that, as I say, we started out in '55, and it was you're building a practice. You know, I mean, I think the first year, Ben and I took in $1,800 the first year.
Between the two of you?
Yeah, between the two. $1,800 the first year.
Was a lot of your clientele from the Jewish community, or was...
No, it's a strange thing. Very few. It's an amazing thing. Very, very few. You had Soloway and Greenberg, Mike Greenberg, and High Soloway pretty well, and Don Snipper, and Maxie Cohen. They had quite a Jewish clientele, and I think that, but I don't think there were too many left over. High Soloway moves in. I don't think there's too much left over.
High Soloway took it all.
He took it all.
Right.
Oh yeah, High Soloway took it all. Turn the thing off for a minute. I'll tell you a story. Because I don't want.
We're going off the break. Okay, we're talking back about early days in law in Ottawa.
Yeah. All right. I think when we started off, you had basically had, I don't know exactly how many, but there were old line firms that had been around, you know, for years and years and years. Very few young people had started up because the few that had graduated before us, before in '55, they had more or less been assimilated by existing firms.
Right.
So there really were no new law firms, or very few new law firms at that time. And as I say, it's like everything else. Whoever walked in your door determined the nature of the business that you were doing. And but we took off. We enjoyed it. As I say, we did any litigation that came along. We did litigation. We did our real estate and wills, estates, whatever happened to come along, and everything built up nicely. And as I say, we're doing a lot of defense work.
Criminal defense.
Yeah, criminal defense, and also, as I say, defense work, civil defense work for insurance companies.
Right.
We're defending for insurance companies and negligence claims and things of that nature.
So was that the bread and butter of your practice?
Yeah, I would say that the insurance work was basically, I think, in the early stages, I think I did about 80% of my work were insurance claims. But initially what I did a little, as soon as I graduated, at that time, here I'm starting out, I'm newly married, I've got a baby at home, and what do you do? I'll tell you what I did. We didn't have any legal aid at that time. There was no legal aid.
Right.
All they would have, if somebody came and asked, it was, say, minimal. There was no institutional legal aid from the government. We would pick up, just do pro bono work ourselves. Individual firms were called upon from time to time to do things, but that was the end. You didn't get paid for it. That's what I'm saying. Not like legal aid of today, where you submit bills to get paid for it. Whatever you did was really legal aid. You got nothing for it. So, how does a guy start out in those days? Well, what I did, a little bit of traditional ambulance chasing, and I had a system. I'd never go to the Civic because people have more brains out that way. I'd go to the General Hospital after somebody found out that somebody they had to have a broken bone, broken leg or something, hit by a car, and I'd walk up to the hospital bed, and I'd end up telling them that I'm a specialist in this type of thing, and half of these people were, they were mainly indigents at that time anyway, or they would have had a lawyer. So I told them it wouldn't cost them anything, which it didn't, and I would get paid out of the, what I collected. So they were happy, and I was happy, and I think in the first couple of years I got about 10 Supreme Court cases out of it, and this way I was able to get a little bit of experience.
Yes.
Which was great,
And you would make work on contingencies.
Yeah. That's what you wouldn't. That's a strictly contingency.
Right.
You couldn't get any money from these people unless you won.
Did you win?
Oh yeah. But I always, I wouldn't have taken the case if I didn't think that it was a good one. And so help me. I think there were about at least 10 cases in the first couple of years, and that way I got a start, and it was a darn good experience, and then we just moved on from there.
And in the end, it would have been good money.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so tell me, moving on from there, what you did.
Well, I guess as I say, I represented this insurance company for about 15 years, and then all of a sudden they changed their claims paying office from Ottawa, closed up the Ottawa office, and they moved to Toronto, and one of the large Toronto firms snapped them. Mm-hmm. And I was quite concerned at that point. I had I had 4 kids at home, and we all have to eat, and I didn't know what was going to happen because 80% of my work was with this automobile negligence stuff for the insurance company. So anyhow, they fortunately I had a couple hundred files, and they didn't take anything away, and so at least, thank goodness, they let me finish whatever I had, and then more commercial stuff seemed to fit in after that. So there always seemed to be something coming along, and it worked out.
But you must have seen over the time.
And then I became active, with the association, with the law association,
yes.
And then I worked myself up through the various chairs, to the presidency, that type of thing.
As president of the County Carleton Law Association, did that garner any business to you?
Not really. I don't think so.
But profile within the legal community.
Yeah, exactly. And it was nice too. We had a wonderful banquet. One of our annual banquets, we had John Diefenbaker was our guest speaker, and it was just with the Shadow Laurie and all Supreme Court judges were invited, and it was just a beautiful evening that we had. It was one of our annual dinners.
Right.
And it was just super. It was a super evening that year when I was president. We had a nice time.
Were you involved in those years in any Jewish organizations?
I just went as far as vice president of the Ottawa Lodge B'nai B'rith.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I did. I didn't take the presidency. I just went. I was just vice president, and that was it. And then I don't know why I didn't, but that's as far as I went. So I was with the Ottawa Lodge B'nai B'rith, and then when we started out through necessity, you start looking. You have to join various organizations, and then I joined. I was a founding member of a South Ottawa Lions Club at that time, and I
Right.
then became a past president of that. And then I became active with the Carleton University Alumni, and I ended up being the president of the National Alumni Association in 1958. And what else did we do? So I was active in the Alumni Association for Carleton. And I was busy with B'nai B'rith for a while, and then I was the president of the men's club in our shul,
Which shul?
Agudath Israel.
When did you join Agudath Israel?
I guess when the kids were small, when we moved out to Golden Avenue.
Right,
When we
let's
moved
talk
up to
about
Golden.
what we haven't talked about is the places where you've lived.
Oh,
where
well,
you
I have
lived.
to tell you the best. I'll tell you the best. Around, we initially, okay, briefly, I'll tell you quickly, Ned.
Sure.
The
it doesn't have to be
okay,
quick.
all right. The first place that we lived was 235 Charlotte, next to the Russian embassy. It was an
All right.
apartment,
Right.
and we rented that, and we rented it the year before I graduated. I worked for Solway. We articled that year, and I had a 2-year lease. So then we came back. The lease we had to come back and finish off. No, we had to wait till the tenant. We sublet it, and then we didn't go back into there. But during the time that we had it, the Russian embassy burnt down. It was burning, and we were there witnessing the Russian embassy burn down. And the firemen were RCMP were dressed up as firemen trying to get in there.
That's a very famous story.
Yeah,
I've heard
and
this
we were
story.
right there. We're right next door watching the place burn. It was beautiful. I kept saying, "Burn, baby, burn!" in those days. Anyway, then the Potashin family were building houses for Highland Construction and Regional Realty and so on, and they built out on Golden Avenue on Tilbury near Golden, and this is where we moved. What year? We moved when Carrie was just born, so it was about 1960, around 1960. I think around 1960.
So you bought that house new?
We bought that house new.
From Regional Realty.
Yeah. And we had it was just a great time, because right next door to where your father-in-law lives, we had a rink there every year, and it was a wonderful hockey rink that I built, and it was about 30 by 60 feet long with boards, lights out at night, nets, right that in that empty lot. And the house next door to your father's wasn't there. Right. So we had really a beautiful rink, and the whole neighborhood congregated. They're there all the time. And then we also had fireworks displays on the 24th. Kenny Ashley from the motel and I would pick up the tab, and we'd have hundreds of dollars worth of firecrackers every year. And again, we had a real party for
July 1st?
Yeah, on May 1st, or May 24th, 24th of May.
Oh,
Firecracker Day, Victoria Day.
Right.
And then we had we had the rinks, and we had the firecrackers, and then what else? I think it was Abelson's YMHA around that place. Anyway, so we had a lot of fun growing up.
What made you settle in the West End?
Well, it just so happened that this. I think it's because Stell's uncle, Dave Rubin, he was a practical architect. He never graduated from university, but he worked for the Potashins and designed their homes. And when he brought us out to that area, and we happened to just settle, we said, well, the price was right, and we ended up going ahead with it. And that's when we settled there, because we always grew up, in Sandy Hill.
Right, you always lived in Sandy
Hill. Always
Hill.
lived in Sandy Hill. But that's why, then we would have gone to, we always went to Agudath Israel.
Right.
And not Agudath Israel, but Adath Jeshurun down on King Edward Avenue.
Yes.
That was where our family went. And that's another thing, rather interesting, talking about that Adath Jeshurun. My grandfather, Wolf, was the vice president. A.J. Freiman was the nominal president, but he was building his department store, and my grandfather Wolf was the vice president for 25 years with A.J. when A.J. was president. And the only honor he ever took, he gave it all the honors. The only honor he ever took each year was to close the curtain, close the Aron Kodesh at Nila.
Really?
That
was a big honor.
Yeah,
that
was his honor. But he, as I say, he was very, very religious, and everything with him was, Yashar, a liar is a thief, and a thief is a liar. Yashar, and that's it. He was about 6 feet, and he was just tall and thin, and he was. But my dad, as I say, I'll go back to that, flip over a little bit. But my father actually supported him. It's funny, eh? my dad ended up having a store first on Bank near Sparks, and then all his life he wanted to have a store on Spark Street, a haberdashery store on Spark Street. And in the I guess in the late 20s and 30s, early 30s, he finally was able to get the store on Spark Street, and he set up his dad in left him with the one on Bank Street around the corner between Sparks and Queen. He had another store, which he kept for his father and another brother, But I'll tell you a funny story about that. This is a very funny. And my dad, as I say, he looked like Paul Newman. I'll show you some pictures. I mean, the man was a real handsome guy. And before he got married, he took out Lucy Bilsky. Okay, Lucy lived in Montreal, and she was nuts about my dad, and she wanted to continue going out with him. And her father went to my dad and says, Jess. And my father had just a store on Bank Street at the time, but his eye teeth were just to have that store on Spark Street. So the old man came to him one day and he says, Jess, he says, if you marry my Lucy, he says, I'll set you up on Spark Street. That's what he told him. My old man's response was, he was a very independent man. And he said, he says, from that point on, he says, I never took her out again. Never. He says, nobody's going to direct my life for me.
It couldn't be bought.
And it couldn't be bought. And he says, there's no way. She ended up marrying Alan Bronfman.
Right.
So she did all right, too.
She did okay.
So she married Alan Bronfman instead. And then a riot. But,
and my family has a connection to that, Alan Bronfman.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
It is funny.
But what else can we do? Am I wandering too much here?
No, the one you're going. We were just talking about the Adath Yeshurun or Jeshurun show.
Okay, and he was the first. As a matter of fact, they have an arch in the cemetery on Bank Street down at the back.
Yes.
That my grandfather W. Wolf, he was the first cemetery committee, and he was responsible for putting together the first Jewish cemetery, real Jewish cemetery on Bank Street.
Was he? When did your grandfather die?
Oh, about 1938, I think, somewhere around there.
And was your father involved in the shul as well?
Oh yeah, my dad was a trustee of the Adath Jeshurun, and he was a little bit heartbroken, though, quite frankly, when Adath Jeshurun and Regal Street and King joined up to form Beth Shalom. Yeah, they just didn't. They ignored him, because again, it was the money, and that's one thing he never had. He had friends, but he never had money. and he felt rotten that they didn't select him as a trustee in the Beth Shalom. He felt terrible. He really did.
And that, from what I understand,
and he also, it's in here, he started up the breakfast club. We had all the Jewish kids and started the breakfast club here.
Where at the shul?
Yeah, I think it was here. It was on here. Yeah, I think. Let's see here. I think there's a note here. I can get to. There's something. Let's see here. There was something. I just got this from my brother. Had this. What was the thing about the breakfast club? I was reading somewhere anyway.
This was at the Adath Yeshurun.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. That's where it was at Adath Yeshurun.
Right.
He set up the first breakfast club in High Bess in later years.
Yes.
And continued with it because he used to run out. My father every Sunday morning go to the Rio Bakery down on Clarence Street, get the buns from the oven and bring it up for the kids. They had to be 13. Once you were 13, you could join the breakfast club, and he used to get that. He was responsible for getting that going too.
So, from what I understand, it was the mid-1950s when that amalgamation was done.
Yeah.
Did your father continue with Beth Shalom?
Well, he did. He continued going to shul,
right?
But he wasn't a happy man. He wasn't a happy camper because all he ever had, he loved his shul, he loved his family,
right.
And he loved sports.
Right.
Game over.
Right.
That was it. That was it. That was his life.
No, that's wonderful, though.
Yeah.
So you joined the Good of Israel.
Yeah.
And your daughters had bat mitzvahs or not?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, we had. Well, first of all, Lynn. I'm sorry. Linny, or the eldest Linny, had before they had bat mitzvahs, she couldn't have a bat mitzvah at that time. They didn't have bat mitzvahs, and so she had. She went through the. I don't know if it was the Agudath Israel or Beth Shalom or whatever it was, but she had a. They had a a whole bunch of
like a program they would have for the girls,
yeah,
right?
and then they had a little celebration
Right.
for them. They're on the stage, and,
Right.
and you know what I mean. Instead
Right.
of a real bat mitzvah,
Right.
it was what would
I think
we
they
call
called it a confirmation.
confirmation. That's what it
they
was.
called it,
Exactly,
right.
Ned. So Linny had a confirmation, and then Joan had a bat mitzvah
Mhm.
at Agudath Israel. Karen had a bat mitzvah at Agudath Israel. Donnie had his bar mitzvah at
Mhm.
Agudath Israel, and they were all married at Agudath Israel.
All your children.
Yeah,
Very nice.
yeah, except for Lynn. Lynn was married on a kibbutz in Israel.
Right. Lynn is your daughter who lives in Israel.
Yeah, now that's a very interesting story too
Sure.
for Linny. Linny at 18, when she left, she didn't want to go on to university. She finished her grade 12 at High School Commerce, and she didn't want to go to university, so we suggested that she go to a kibbutz in Israel, which she took up. The only strange thing about it was that the plane was to leave on, I'm not sure it was October the 6th or October the 7th. It was the day that the war broke out, the Yom Kippur War broke out
Huh.
in October 73 on a Saturday. Our tickets, mine, Estelle's, and Lynn's, we were taking her over, left New York the following day, on Sunday night, the night after the Yom Kippur War broke out. So we spoke to Joseph Yaakov, who was an embassy counselor, Israel embassy counselor, and he said, "What?" He said, we asked him whether we should go ahead and or stay home. No, go ahead. He says it'll be like the 6-day war. He says it'll be over in a week. Little did he know, what a terrible war this was. But in any event, we left out of New York that following night, and we couldn't understand why they didn't preempt our seats, because they had hundreds of Israeli soldiers they wanted to get back to their units, and I don't know how they let us go. And then we put Linny we got on the plane. When we got opposite Cyprus, the captain hollered. We were the last jumbo jet out of New York going that way. That was it. And we got to Cyprus, and the captain of the plane says, "Folks, look out the right and look out the left windows. We're picking up our Phantom escort." And we had a fighters escort us into Ben Gurion. That was the last one they allowed until the war was over. And we arrived on the third day of the war, and the following day we found the kibbutz office, and we got Linny up to her kibbutz. And at that time, they said, and then she called us the following day, but that was one of the saddest days of her life. I mean, to leave an 18-year-old, just left her, like little orphan Annie, when we couldn't turn around to say goodbye. It was terrible. And the following day she called us and said, "All the men have gone to war, and could you come and pick me up?" Well, Stell, through her, she was president of the local Adath at that time, she was able to get hold of a car, and they grabbed all the cars for, to transport soldiers. But we got a car, and we went and picked up Lynn, and then we drove up. This is unbelievable. We drove up to Haifa, and when we went on past Haifa, and we don't know. You see, there's no reports out of anything. And here, like what do they say about ignorance is bliss, sort of thing. We drive up past Haifa. We're heading up towards Rosh Pina, and there's all these medical way stations, that are there, and we don't know from nothing. We're just driving along, and finally we get to a point where we say, "Hey, I guess it must be getting close to the war scene. We better turn around. We're heading towards the Golan." And we turn around, and we said, "Well, let's stay at the Dan Carmel." And this is a sight, so as long as I live, I'll never forget this. We go into the Dan Carmel Hotel. We're the only 3 guests in the entire hotel. By that time, all tourists had been sent home. They were gone from the country. We go into the hotel. Unbelievable. They had every single key was in its spot. Every key. Say it's 200-300 rooms in the
Huge
hotel, Ned,
hotel.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Every key was in a slot. We were the only guests in the entire hotel. What had happened was that a Syrian jet had come down. 2 Syrian jets came down to attack the refineries, and as it turns out, one of them simply blew up for whatever reason. It wasn't shot down; it just blew up itself, and the other guy turned tail and had left. And so, otherwise, we could have had some problems there. But they thought that the first guy thought the second guy thought the first one was shot down, which it wasn't. It just blew up. Strange, how things happen.
Unbelievable.
So we ended up, and that was quite a trying time because, there were blackout conditions for the whole war. All of the lights in the cars were painted blue with a little speck, with a light that go through the center of the blue. And I went looking in Tel Aviv. There were the war correspondents were in a couple of the hotels. I have all, I have I've got all the directives here that were given. This is really sort of a historical thing. I've got all the directives that were handed out to war correspondents in the '73 war, because I kept copies and brought them all home. And I was looking for a friend that was on CBC reporter. He was always traveling on war scenes, Johnny Drury. So I went to the two hotels where the correspondents were resident, and I checked the lists, and he wasn't there. After the war, I met him 2 weeks after the war here. I phoned him up. I said, John, where were you? He says, I was in Cairo, covering the Cairo end. And but it was rather interesting because he told me, he says, Al, he says, I'm sitting with an Egyptian colonel on the seaside, and he says he's a Sandhurst graduate and all this fancy guy. And he says, he told me, he says, as long as we live and breathe, we'll never rest until there's no more Jews around here. He says, they're nothing but a cancer in the Mideast, and we'll never rest until they're gone. Okay? From the Arab viewpoint,
Yes.
So
your daughter stayed in Israel.
So Lenny stayed and made a life for herself,
right.
And she ended up being on Ein Shemer.
Right.
And quite a few people had signed the Declaration of Independence there that lived in that kibbutz. And then she met Richard. He was an immigrant from India, believe it or not, and his mother and grandparents were longtime native Jewish Palestinians that lived in Beersheba. And they moved over, his mother moved over with the father, who was Indian, and he was a cargo master with KLM airplanes over in New Delhi. They had 4 children, and then when he reached his retirement, they all moved back to Israel. And that's the story with Lynn. So Lynn has 2 children, Laurie and Ilana, and Laurie just completed the Army. She just finished 2 years in the Army, and it looks like she's going to law school. She's writing exams now to go to law school. Looks like in Israel.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And your other children live where?
Well, okay. So Lenny is happy in Israel. She was just here. She came here for her 50th wedding anniversary party. So we were really surprised. Oh my God, we didn't know she was coming, and she brought Laurie along. And Ilana, as she's very religious, she's taken up with a very religious boy, and so she's into wearing the long dresses and so on. Mm-hmm. The younger sister, and Laurie's Laurie's a runner. It was rather interesting. She's a long distance runner, mm-hmm. and she's won some all-Israel championships for the border police against the regular police. Wow. Yeah, really. Interesting. For a runner. Anyhow, then Joni went to the U of T and graduated with an arts degree, and then she took nursing because this is kind of funny too, when we first brought her down to University of Toronto just to take her to school, she didn't know what lineup to go into, so she saw this kid with a yarmulke on, and she goes and asks him. It turns out Billy Lopayton from Windsor, and she ends up marrying him. Isn't that funny, eh? Isn't that a riot, eh? And now they live in Beverly Hills, and Billy became a surgeon, a transplant surgeon for livers and kidneys and stuff. Yes. And he was at the Cedar-Sinai Hospital in Beverly Hills for a number of years. And now he's also a very successful entrepreneur right now.
Now I understand he's in the internet business.
Yeah,
right?
He's got his yellow online internet business and so on and so forth. Plus.
So I understand.
Plus. So anyway, and so Billy and Joni, they have a daughter, Jessie. And then the third is Karen, and she married Brian, and he was from Montreal, Brian Clark from Montreal, and they have 3 children, Brammy and Andrew and Aaron, and it's expensive for these kids, $7,000 a year to go to Hebrew school, all day Hebrew, so they're going broke for crying out loud. Poor guy's got 3 jobs, works at night in emergency and everything else to pay for all these kids. And so that's and Donald, Donnie, Donnie is a political science associate professor at Western University.
Right.
And he has Rebecca,
and also married to someone from Ottawa.
And Rebecca, and he's got a little son now, Seth.
Yes.
Seth Lawrence after my brother, and he married Stephanie Loomer from Ottawa.
Yes.
So that's the story there. So everybody's happy and doing well.
Very nice. Well, unless there's something else you want to add on, because we've been doing this for almost 2 hours. It's 10:15.
Oh my God!
And I've been told I should make it an hour and a half.
Okay, good. Is there anything else, Ned, that you wanted to ask me that I should tell you?
Well, I guess what we did, what to me was very interesting, was we really were able to touch on the thing about the Tel Aviv Tennis Club.
Yeah, that's neat.
And really to focus on a part of the history that's probably not too well documented, but probably needs to be.
Yes.
And that'll be some of the things that I will highlight.
Okay.
And thankfully that your father's history is documented, but the insights that you can give on that you gave on the history of a young Jewish person and being well known because of sports and not because of how much money he made, but what he did what he achieved as a person.
This is in the Jewish bulletin. This is in the bulletin that you referred to.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at this. This sums it up.
So just read this, I guess, to close this. We'll talk about this. Is the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin Review article of December 12, 1986 summarizes Jess's Hall of Fame induction as follows. As an athlete, Jess's accomplishments rank among the best in Ottawa during the early 1900s, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. As a community-conscious activist, his work brought the Jewish community together and enhanced the social, intellectual, and athletic life of Jewish youth. His influence on Ottawa and on the Ottawa Jewish community extended well beyond sports, but as a sports personality, he was a paragon of excellence for young Jewish athletes. It's beautifully said.
Yes, and you have that.
What year did your father pass away?
1975.
And your mother?
My mother, 3 years later.
1978. Very good. So I just want to thank you for making the time.
It's my pleasure
to do this.
And if there's anything else, I just, as I say, Ned, I'm going away, in a week, and I thought it rather important that we get together, because I don't know when all these interviews will be over with. And
the interviews are going over the time. I'm just going to close this and say thank you for spending the time, and this will be marked and inputted into the Ottawa Jewish archives for the city of Ottawa.
Okay?
Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ned.